Hi, this is Adam Eliel Berkowitz from Israel 365 News, coming at you live from the Golan, where all the fun is at. Today, I have an amazing guest. His name is Shai Ben Tekoa. He's a journalist. He's the author of Phantom Nation, a book about inventing the Palestinians, in quotation marks, as the obstacle to peace. It's available on Amazon in hardcover and Kindle, and he has a free broadcast once a week. Bearing the same name as the book. It can be heard on Israel Talk Radio, and it's also available for subscribers 3 times a week at phantom-nation.com. And the amazing thing about Shai, whether or not he knows it, is he became my friend. We lived in the same community. It's got to be over 10 years ago. He came to my Shabbos table, and he was the first one who introduced me to the idea of seeing the news, interpreting the current events through the lens of the Bible. He is a historian and journalist who interprets the news through the lens of the Bible. So, Shai, I don't know if you're aware that you were my mentor, but it just struck me. You seemed like such a logical person, and then I heard you referring to the Arabs as the Bnei Ishmael, and I was like, what do you mean? You're a historian, and you said, well, it's the most accurate way to refer to them. And I think you've seen you've had a lot of insights into current events because of you're seeing the news through the biblical lens. Am I making this up, or would you say that's semi-accurate?
Yeah, it's pretty accurate. When I study the weekly Torah reading, it's rare when I don't hear echoes of what's in the news. It's always current.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's spooky. Spooky. Like Yisro, we read Yisro yesterday. We were in the middle of an election campaign here in Israel, and Yisro is a Gentile. Because Moses is the greatest man who ever lived, or after Abraham, maybe, only he didn't know how to manage. He needed help from a Gentile. The Israeli state is an amazing place when it comes to computing and medicine and all kinds of, and they're doing fine in movies now. The problem with Israel is its political system is from hunger. It's the worst political system in the liberal democratic West. And when I read the parsha that we read on the Sabbath, of Yisro, Jethro in English, Moses has to turn to him for help. He has to be taught. There are better political systems than Israel has. It's one of the ways we do not shine, that's for sure.
Wow. I didn't even, that passed right by me. I'm kind of amazed. Is there any other insight you had about this week's Torah portion?
Well, that's what comes up every year I read it, and that happens in the middle of, we're now moving towards our fourth election campaign.
Mm-hmm.
The political system here is for the birds. Every liberal democratic system that I know that is a good one, we're all in the English model, in America and Canada and New Zealand. There are two basic parties. There's a left and a right, like the human body. The body politic mirrors the individual body. We got a left and we got a right. There's day and night, men, women. You need a left, you need a right, two big parties. Israel they've registered, I think now over 30 parties. And there's like 12 of them have a chance getting in. And you cannot manage a liberal democracy with so many parties. And it results in these ridiculous, expensive elections every 2 years. We need help.
I think America has precisely the opposite problem in that they're making a separation between the two parties. And just like you need two wings to fly, right, they're kind of too separated.
Well, now what's happened to the American system is that the Democrats this is no longer liberalism. Liberalism in its heyday, the age of the American Revolution, the author of the Declaration of Independence was the patron saint of American liberalism in its youth and its greatness. But all ideologies, like the men who create them, have a lifespan. And liberalism has shot its wad. It no longer exists. What's happened to the Democrats is they've been taken over by lunatics of the left and Bolsheviks. And so the two-party system in America has collapsed because one of the parties is now off the charts. They're crazy.
Can you see that through a biblical lens?
Well, what I see, I don't want to depress the people who are watching or listening, but I find it most significant in a biblical way that in December, 2 months ago, we had the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the Puritans stepping onto Plymouth Rock 400 years ago. And history shows that civilizations last about 400 years. We also have the famous Covenant of the Parts in the 5 books of Moses. And in that covenant, the God of Abraham and of us all says, from you is going to come a people in another 400 years. It's going to take 400 years for a people to come out of you, which showed me once when I was becoming more religious than I ever had been, that this is an inhuman book. God promises people, promises Abraham something special 400 years in the future. If he would promise me something 400 years in the future, what would I say? What do I care? It's so far away. I'm not going to be able to enjoy it. What are you offering me? I want a genie in a bottle who'll give me 3 wishes immediately. I want instant gratification. 400 years is 10 times 40. That's 10 times a generation, the 40 years in the desert. And you go through 10 generations, and America now is in trouble. My excellent 1-volume Columbia University encyclopedia under the entry for the Roman Empire begins with the Roman Empire lasted 400 years. It's been 400 years since the English were at their peak. There's a kid I ran into here not long ago in Israel who was just beginning to learn about the world outside, and he's puzzled as to why the United Kingdom is one of the 5 big powers on the Security Council in the UN. He says, it's such a small country. What's it doing there? The child has no notion of the amazing British Empire, arguably the greatest empire ever, wrapping its way around the globe. We're all speaking English. Everybody speaks English. It's an amazing empire. That's the way things go. And now I fear for the future of America because it's lost. This last election was stolen. It's so clear to anybody with brains in their, with their eyes in their heads, and that it's being stolen is very.
This 400-year mark, I think you have hit the target so precisely. There was a woman, Nicole Hannah-Jones, from the New York Times. She wrote the 1619 Project, which was basically a rewriting of American history, making America out to be the most horrible, evil empire ever devised.
Yes.
And it's almost as if, according to your 400 rule, she wrote the gravestone for the United States by saying, no, it's 400 years, it's over. It's almost as if.
Well, also to stay with the biblical framework, and for many of your listeners, they might be interested in this from my research. When the Puritans landed on Plymouth Rock, they had the day before been writing the Mayflower Compact on board the Mayflower, which was the way they were going to organize their society. And I once saw a photocopy of a piece of paper that was on the Mayflower. On one side was a draft of the Mayflower Compact, and on the flip side were 2 columns of words. One was in English, common things, knife, fork, bed, whatever. And opposite, written in biblical Hebrew, were their counterparts, the translation. Because the Puritans were drunk on what we call our Bible, the Tanakh, what Christians refer to in translation as the Old Testament. Those Puritans were studying Hebrew, teaching Hebrew. They landed. They spent the first 16 years, and after 16 years, they realized they have to begin training the next generation of leaders, because all their leaders were ministers of their religion, of their Christianity, a variety, but they were so taken with the Puritan, the Puritans were so taken with the stories of the Jewish Bible, they wanted to know what's really in it, not by translation. They studied Hebrew constantly. They gave their names to their kids, all of these Hebrew names, Abraham, Leah, Jedediah, Ichabod, and so forth. And they established a school by John Harvard, and the job was to train the next generation of leaders of the community. And you had to study 4 years. You got a BA. All these people were studying to be ministers. And one thing you had to study every year was Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. And after 4 years, the valedictorian gave the speech, the valedictory speech in biblical Hebrew. And that was the tradition at Harvard College for 150 years. Only after the American Revolution did they drop it, because it was revolutionary times and the kids think, oh, it's old-fashioned now. But the people who founded America were drunk on our Bible, and they thought that this was the model for them. There is, in other words, a attachment to the Jewish people which goes all the way back to Plymouth Rock. It's not because of AIPAC or the Jewish lobby or the Benjamins, according to Ilhan Omar, that there's a connection between the American people and the Jewish people. It's a bizarre circumstance that in the United Nations, Israel is all alone, except for the greatest empire, the greatest culture, the greatest country the world's ever seen, uniquely wrapping its arm around us and protecting us from everybody else. My book began by doing a project. I was hired by the chief of staff of Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, and I did research into the UN voting patterns, and I found proof that we are the chosen people, and not because we are chosen by God, which we believe, but there's no proof of that. What there is proof is that the position of the Jews in the United Nations, the family of nations, is absolutely unique. There's nothing like it. It is a prophecy come true, a prophecy spoken by a Gentile prophet called Bilam, who says, you will be a people that dwell alone and not be counted among the nations. Israel is the only nation in the United Nations that cannot sit on the Security Council, the way things are structured. There are 193 member states. Israel is the only one that cannot sit there. This makes Israelis crazy. I love it, because I know the UN from inside out. It's a totally corrupt organization. And everyone who cares about freedom and liberty should get out. United States, Israel. And because we are singled out for abuse, which we saw again on Friday. On Friday in The Hague, the International Court, Criminal Court, decided to investigate our war crimes against the putatively Paleolithic Palestinian people. In 2014, they fire rockets into our children's bedrooms, and when we fight back, we're accused of war crimes. The International Criminal Court is a wing of the United Nations, established by the United Nations. And as I've come across in my research, it's fair to see and say that the International Court, the Criminal Court, was established with a principal purpose of attacking Israel as a war criminal. This was in 1998. We are singled out at the UN for special treatment. We are the chosen people mathematically. I discovered in my research, I read 870 UN resolutions on Israel between 1945, when the UN was founded, until 1989. In those 45 years, I discovered that their individual country votes against Israel came to a total of, fasten your seatbelts, 55,642 times people raised their hands with the thumbs down against Israel. 55,642 times in 45
Well,
years.
if you take the simple verse, if you bless, if people bless you, they'll be blessed, and if they curse you, they'll be cursed. That's some mighty bad karma right there.
Well, it's true, and the evangelicals, God bless them, have discovered that verse, and it's true in history. Those who bless us live a good life. The greatest country in the world blesses us. There's a connection. And when you look at all the people who have hated and persecuted us, the Nazis, the communists, the Muslims, all three of them are totalitarian systems. All three of them are rooted in hatred of the Jews, and their people suffer the most. Look at Holocaust. We focus, of course, on ourselves, but look what the Germans did to themselves by their craziness. 8 million Germans died in that war. All of their major cities were burnt to a crisp. That's what they got. That's where Jew hatred got them. And when you were in the Soviet Union, and Stalin was wanting to plan to out Hitler, he was going to kill all the millions of Jews in the Soviet Union. And look at that. It was a miserable, evil empire, the great Ronald Reagan called it. Those who bless us live a good life. Those who curse us have a miserable life.
This is a classic case of Shai Ben Tekoa looking at history, finding the verse, and it all makes sense. I love that. All you have to do is look at who curses Israel, and the history writes itself.
Yes.
We're at an interesting transition where we went through 4 years where, my goodness, Donald Trump certainly blessed Israel. He went out of his way. And now, within the first week, even in manners that hurt his own party and hurt himself and certainly hurt America, Biden has gone out of his way to erase all that and work to sever the connection with Israel.
Yes.
Are we going to see some bad karma coming out of that?
I'm not a prophet.
I mean, well, you do delve into the scriptures.
What I do know is that he has hired one anti-Jew Jew after another.
Isn't that everyone points at the fact that he's brought a lot of Jews into his staff, but they're all self-hating, Israel-hating Jews. It's horrifying.
Yeah, I don't use the term self-hating. The late journalist in New York City, Sidney Zion, bless him, one of his lines was, "They're not self-hating Jews. They love themselves. They hate Jews." And the self-hating Jew is just a traitor. Every people have traitors, and these are traitors. That's all. Jew hatred is an equal opportunity hatred. You don't have to be a Gentile to hate Jews. There are Jews who are very good at it too. Karl Marx, for starters, he was the first communist who wrote the Communist Manifesto. And communism is rooted in anti-Semitism. Capitalism was the great evil for Karl Marx. And who were the capitalists? The Jew bankers, the Rothschilds, who loved wars. Capitalism leads to war because that's when the Jew bankers make their most money as war privateers. This is the mind of Karl Marx. And this is what happens when you go off the rails. Bernie Sanders is like that.
They just had a vote for keeping the embassy in Jerusalem, and he was one of the 3 people that voted against it, which I was like, Bernie, and he's been to Israel, so it's like...
Yes, he was also spent his honeymoon in the Soviet Union when millions of Jews could not get out.
Well, there is that. There is that.
He's an old Stalinist from the 30s. He's a fossil. He's an contemptible man. What are you going to do? But again, these people are propelled by their hostility to the Jewish people. It's just extraordinary. The force of the hatred of the Jews moves history. What was World War II?
So Patrick wants to know, who are we referring to as self-hating Jews in Trump's staff? If you can give us right, lay it on us, Shai.
He has appointed as his point man on reestablishing relations with Iran, which publicly
Shai, we were asked about Trump stuff. I think she meant Biden, or we're answering about Biden. So there's a little bit of confusion.
Yeah.
Oh, Biden. Sorry. Okay. Thanks for the correction, Josh.
No, Trump actually, his staff, I always got a kick out of the fact that he was sending these delegations of Jews wearing yarmulkes on their head to the Arab countries to make peace. And they did it. That was the amazing thing. The level of chutzpah was off the charts there. So so the self-hating Jews we're referring to are in Biden's staff. Who in Biden's staff
has appointed as his man, who he used in 2015 as well, to write the first agreement, so-called, with Iran? It's Robert Malley. Robert Malley's father was an Egyptian Jew who converted to communism. He married an American Jewess who also converted to communism. She worked for the FLN terrorist in Algeria in the 1950s. And Robert Malley, grew up in Paris with them, speaks perfect French and, of course, of English. He is the point man now. Malley is a hater of Israel. There's no other way to put it. These guys, or like Dennis Ross, they all want us in Judea and Samaria to evacuate. In every generation, the Jews are driven from their homes, and these are people who want to drive Jews from their homes now. The so-called two-state solution sounds good, but what it really means in practice, according to the Arabs, is that 500,000 plus Jews will be driven from their homes and presumably put into refugee camps, I don't know, tent cities, like the Ma'abarot after the founding of the state in 1948 when the country was flooded with refugees. Maybe that's what they want, I don't know. And they want us to hand over Judea and Samaria to these phony baloney so-called Palestinians. My whole book is about the invention of that phony identity. There never were any Palestinians. There aren't any Palestinians now. It's a complete farce. Although, again, it's the power of Jewishness to do this to people. The whole world, the United Nations spends more time on Israel than any other problem facing the world. And it's all because the Jews stole Palestine from Palestinians. And the truth is, there are no Palestinians, there never were any Palestinians, and we didn't steal anything. That's anti-Semitic.
Could you give me a quick taste of, if someone challenges me when I say, well, I've taken to putting Palestinian when I use it in my articles in quotes. If I'm challenged on that, yeah, because it struck me when they were talking about Rashida Tlaib and other Palestinian, they're the air quotes, Palestinians in the U.S. government. They're born in America. So, and then you look at where their parents were from. They're from Israel proper. By all standards, they are the children of Israeli Arab immigrants to America. So if someone challenges me on that, what would be my quick put down response to them?
Rashida, by the name, she misspells her last name. I would love to ask her why she does that. The name is Talib. And Talib in Arabic means student or pupil. And she writes it T-L-A-I-B, and that's wrong. Probably, possibly, I don't know. I have to find out. To hide the fact that Talib means student, and in the plural, it's Taliban. And so that's her connection. But she cannot speak about any subject without telling you she has Palestinian answers. You ask her, Rashida, what time you got? My Palestinian answers according to their watch, and that's what she does. She has this fantasy that she was taught in America that she has Palestinian ancestors. And my book shows without a shadow of a doubt, listen to this carefully, that for the first 40 years, the first biblical generation after World War I, when the League of Nations created a Palestine that never had existed under the Muslims, they never used the term. They had another name for the country. They never knew a place called Palestine, never used the term. For the first 40 years, the leader of the Arabs here, Haj Amin al-Husseini, insisted there is no such country as Palestine. That was the position until the 1960s, when they flip-flopped due to the terrorist war in Algeria in the 1950s, because in that war, the Algerians had the brains to alter their vocabulary. Among themselves, it was a jihad, but they learned to speak the language that the Europeans wanted to hear of a national liberation war by freedom fighters. That's all rubbish. Among themselves, it was all a jihad. That was Algeria's influence on the so-called Palestinians. They imitated them when they created the Fatah in 1959. That's the origin of the Fatah, which, by the way, to stay in the religious idiom, Fatah was chosen because it's an Arabic, or sort of, it's an Islamic principle. It means conquest of the infidel. It's the chapter title of chapter 48 in the Quran, and it also enshrines the technique of lying to your enemy that you want peace, and then when you get a chance, you break the peace treaty and you attack. That's Fatah. Fatah was founded by 8 Muslim brothers, and they, following the example in Algeria, they learned to speak the language of the West. We're the ancient Palestinians, just like the Jews. This is our ancient homeland too. This was stolen for us by these racist, fascist, imperialist Jews, and we want our freedom just like everybody else. It's all blah, blah, blah rubbish that has no basis in history. For 40 years, they said there's no such place as Palestine, and they were absolutely right, because for 14 centuries, they ruled here, most of it, except for the Crusader period, for about 200 years. All the other times, they ruled here, the Muslims, and they never did anything with the country. They didn't call it Palestine. They had no concept of a country with boundaries. They didn't call it Philistine as they do today. They called it Al-Surya al-Janibiyya, in Arabic meaning southern Syria. And Haj Amin al-Husseini, he started publishing after the during the peace conference after World War I, published a newspaper in Jerusalem he called Southern Syria, to fight the conception of a Palestine, which had meaning to Jews and to Christians as a synonym for the promised land in the Bible, promised to the Jewish people. Their position was, there's no such place. There's no such place. Only the Jews in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s were proud to use the term Palestinian. In fact, if you read Exodus by Leon Uris, the 1958-59 bestseller, every reference to Palestinians in that book is to Zionist Jews. And every reference to the Arabs, he called them Arabs. You can see it in the movie starring Paul Newman.
There's even I know amongst the Bedouins, they don't like it when you call them Palestinians.
They're not.
Well, they're not Palestinians, and they're proud to be Arabs. And also, ever since the signing of the Abraham Accords, when we've had a much better connection with the real Arab countries, there's a huge difference. You can talk to these people.
Well, again, the Abraham Accords have a little problem with it because the title is off. I wouldn't call it the Abraham Accords, because along with the fiction of a Palestinian people whose country was stolen from them, there are other cliches, such as Jerusalem is holy to Islam, like it is to the Jews. No, it's not. I know this. I would testify in court. Why? Because I saw Arab East Jerusalem in 1967 after the war. It was a dump. This is not how you treat a holy city. Jerusalem means nothing to the Arabs. It never did. All its meaning is that it's a trophy. It's proof that God loves the Muslims more than the Jews now. They lost their covenant. Other than that, nothing happened here. They never did anything with the city, and it turned it into a stinking garbage dump. Lots of the visitors who began to come in the 19th century all commented on the smell, because there was very little sanitation. And this is a culture of beasts of burden. You ride around on donkeys, and you put all your commerce and commodities on donkeys, and they do their business in the street. And if you don't have good sanitation, it stinks. There wasn't good garbage collection. So it's not true that these people have venerated Jerusalem. It's just not true. It's a lie.
Most people don't understand that the Golden Dome, which is so impressive, when was it made gold? When was it coated in gold?
The end of the 600s as a tourist attraction. Because what had happened at that time was that the Arabs were fighting as they're fighting today in Yemen, as they're fighting today in Libya. They're constantly fighting with each other. And at a certain point in time, the guys in Mecca were having their fight with the guys in Damascus, and they wouldn't let the guys in Damascus make the pilgrimage to Mecca.
Right. And
so they built the Dome of the Rock to say, people, oh, you can make the pilgrimage now to Jerusalem. It's just as good. Come on in, guys. It's the Disneyland of, that's what it was for. That's the Golden Dome. And of course, where they placed it is crucial. It was a statement that we have replaced the Jews. They have lost their special covenant with Allah, and now we have it, because they've been bitter ever since Ishmael lost the covenant. He was the firstborn son who didn't get it.
Well, if I can correct, it was the mosque was actually built in the 600s, but the dome was not gold until 1993. When the king of Jordan sold one of his houses and had it gold coated. And I remember seeing photos, the weeds on the Temple Mount in between the flagstones were waist high. It was hugely neglected. It was not a pilgrimage site for them. So
he re-gilded the dome. The dome was a tourist attraction. In about the 690s, it was created. I think the caliph at the time was Malik. I forget. It's been a long time since I dealt with those particular issues. But it's all a bluff. It's not holy to them. And likewise, the Abraham Accords, all you have to do is read chapter 21 of Bereshit, of the book of Genesis, and you see that Islam is not an Abrahamic religion, because none other than Abraham himself kicked Ishmael out of his house. He expelled him. This is how you have to deal with these violent people. You expel them. He made the decision that actually it was his wife, Sarah. She was the wise one. Sarah understands during the weaning ceremony of little Isaac, who's like about 2 or 3 when he's being weaned. And that means that Ishmael was about 16 or 17, and he's making fun, Umitzachek is the Hebrew, and he's making fun of his little half-brother because he's the center of attention. And wise Sarah, who has watched this boy grow up, this teenager, and she understands that when Abraham passes on, he's quite old, this guy is capable of killing her son. So she says to Abraham, they got to go. And eventually, and God says to Abraham, who doesn't want to do it because he loved Ishmael for his good qualities, is that completely bad? And God says to Abraham, listen to your wife. She knows better than you in this situation. And so they are expelled because Ishmael was not capable of an Abrahamic religion. Abraham, by our tradition, was the kindest man in the world. And
if I may, there's actually an interesting point, is that when he sent her away, they used the Hebrew word ligaresh, which means to send out or to send away, but it also means to divorce. And when you divorce a woman, you give her the divorce agreement, and then she has no more claims. There's no claims by her or her sons to anything. So if you're looking at this, the current events from a biblical perspective, as you're so good at doing, this point you just made, they have no claim to like inherit or take a part in the inheritance.
It's not only that. And not only that, Ishmael is 17 years old. And we just had another murder attempt near Ariel 2 weeks ago by a 17-year-old. If you want to know what Ishmael looked like, just tune in the news in Israel when there's footage of an Arab mob throwing stones. They're all 16 and 17 years old. That's who Ishmael is. He's a wild teenager. That's what the Torah teaches us, and that's what we see in their violence. They can't possibly be the legitimate inheritors of Abraham's spiritual life. They're much too violent and cruel to each other. Not only what they do to us, what they do to each other is unbelievably cruel and vicious. It's another culture, and we have to keep in mind that the prophecy of Ishmael, who would become a wild ass of a man, according to the text, it's a Pera Adam, the great Ramban, Nachmanides, writing in 13th century Spain, said, take a look at the Hebrew here when it says that he will be Per Adam, and that gets translated as wild ass of a man. What Rambam teaches us is this is bad Hebrew. It should be Adam Per, the adjective and the noun reverse, as in many languages, if not English. To call him Per Adam is to say that his essence, his substance, the noun is Per. And then he has a modifier of a man. He has the spirit of a wild, undomesticated jackass. And that's who we wrestle with these kids who are constantly attacking us with stones and incendiary bombs. They cannot accept our right to live free. This is a complete contradiction of Islam. The very existence of Israel is something that Islam cannot tolerate. Versus, by the way, the Christians who have learned to support Israel. Not all of them, but many of them. They have accepted the fact that we've come back. I think, according to certain theologians in the Christian belief, that the second coming has to occur before the Jews come back. We did, but that hasn't changed anything. People have accepted that. And there's even a celebration and an appreciation of that. Christians come and they find out they're welcome, and we don't give them a hard time, given the history, which was not a good one. Versus the Muslims, who have not been able to accept the life of Israel reborn. It's an insult. It's an offense. It cannot exist. It says in the Quran that Jews must be oppressed and humiliated, and not only Jews, by the way, Christians as well. What's going on right now, by the way, in Nigeria and elsewhere in the Muslim world is the massacre of Christians. It's happening in people, the Coptic Christians in Egypt get killed every once in a while. What's going on in Nigeria is terrible, and it's happening in Pakistan as well. The Muslims cannot tolerate the existence of Jews and Christians who do not convert.
If I can, I just want to relate to two questions that we had. One, Patrick Renteria asked, at what age was Ishmael and Hagar sent out?
16 or 17.
16 or 17. Ishmael was 16 or 17 years old when he was sent out.
Correct.
Also, there was a question that's not so it's not exactly on what we were talking about, but I want to relate to it. Someone asks, first of all, blessings from Holland. So we got to bless you back. That's the way it works. Where do we think the original place of the original temple is? The place of the, well, she said mosque. I believe it's mosque, yes. Or another place.
I don't consider myself a great expert on the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, but it seems to be exactly where the Golden Dome is. That's the whole point. This is a replacement. They have replaced us. They have dispossessed us. Obama did the same thing, by the way, in his inaugural speech in 2009, which nobody paid much attention to. Obama slapped the Jewish people in the face in his inaugural speech in 2009 within 10 minutes of taking the oath of office. It's this replacement theory because he's a Muslim. What he said was this. We all know that it's been customary in recent years to speak of America as a Judeo-Christian culture. Obama, you can check the record, in his inaugural speech, spoke of the crazy quilt or the melting pot of America. Everybody does this. It's wonderful. All different times. He says, we're a country of Christians and of Muslims, comma, Jews and Hindus. Instead of being the second place religion of importance in America, we were elbowed back to the third position. In his language, it's the Muslims who are going to take our place. They already have some 3,000 outposts in America now called mosques.
I also want to point out, when it comes to the Temple Mount, the mosque is actually Aqsa Mosque, which is the silver dome on the southern end of the Temple Mount. And the gold dome is the Dome of the Rock. It is not a mosque.
Correct.
Because it is a shrine to actually where the Jewish temple was. That is where, according to most opinions, the Holy of Holies was. In the temple. And it just emphasizes the reason why they pray in the mosque at the southern end is they don't want to pray in the direction of the temple. They want to turn their backs to the temple.
Which they do every time. Yes, they prayed in the direction of Jerusalem for a year when Muhammad was still alive, until he realized that the Jews rejected him. His claim, the claim of Islam, is that Muhammad is the last and final prophet in a long line of prophets in the Jewish Bible. And what Islam also does is they claim that everything in the Bible is really near thous. Abraham was a Muslim. Isaac, Jacob, Joshua, they're all Muslims. And the Jews, now they say, this goes back to 2000, at Camp David, Prime Minister Ehud Barak was there, and President Clinton was there, and Yasser Arafat was there, and Mahmoud Abbas. And they told him that the Jews never had any temples on the Temple Mount. They just say that because they want to steal it from us. The psychologists will tell you this is psychological projection. They steal it from us. That's what Islam did. They stole the Temple Mount from us and accused us of wanting to steal it back from them. And also they deny the existence of it. Clinton, who was evidently a bit of a goody two-shoes as a boy, as opposed to his adult life, and was a practicing Christian, I don't know what his church was, but he was just flabbergasted because the temple appears in the Christian scripture. It's referenced, I think, over 100 times. These are major moments in the story.
Also, you said that the Islam usurped all of the Old Testament. They also usurped a good part of the New Testament. Jesus is a prophet of Muhammad, according to the Quran. His name he's called Isa. There's a grave. He's in Medina next to an open grave, waiting for him to come down from heaven to announce the arrival of the Mahdi, the Muslim
version of
Messiah, and then he's going to take his place, buried next to Muhammad, and he's going to convert all the Christians to Islam.
Yes.
So when I first heard that, I mean, I'm Jewish. I don't have a dog in the game, but I was horrified. It just seemed so incredibly disrespectful to another person's religion. You know, if you want to have your own religion, great. Just don't take my folks. You know, don't take my Bible. It was a bit disturbing to me.
That's Islam. Islam, by the way, the very name alludes to its hostility to the Jewish people. The very name. Islam means mission. And it points to Ibrahim, their mispronunciation of Avraham, binding his son for a sacrifice. He submitted to God's command that he bind his son. Only in the Muslim tradition, the son bound was Ishmael and not Yitzchak. And it did not take place on the Temple Mount, as we have believed for thousands of years. In fact, the Muslim is required once in his lifetime to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. It's called a Hajj, which is their mispronunciation of the word Chag. and you go around the Kaaba, this structure, and you go around it 7 times, and that's where Ibrahim bound his son Ismail for a sacrifice. And when you ask a Muslim, excuse me, but the Jews say it was Yitzchak, and it happened in Jerusalem. And their response is, the Jews lie. The Jews plagiarize the story from the Quran. And then you tell them, the Jewish Bible was written down about, well, not the Bible, but the 5 books, first 5 books of the Bible written down about 2,000 years before Muhammad was born. And they say, yes. And when Moses brought down from Mount Sinai what he was given, he brought down the Quran. And then the Jews rewrote it. And the original text is the Quran brought back to life by Muhammad. The Jewish book is a forgery. The truth is there. The Quran is full of dozens of Jewish people right out of the Jewish book, and their stories in every case are retold and changed. And when you ask them, how do you explain these discrepancies, that's their answer. The Jews plagiarize the Quran from us.
So if I may, I love, it's like you switch back and forth between history and Bible, like without missing a beat. It's for you, it's one and the same. I love that. And not only do I love it, but it seems to work. It seems to be accurate. It seems to fill in the blanks, which I'm really thrilled with.
Let me tell you this. If we have time, I don't know what the time is.
Sure.
Before I became an observant Jew, I had majored in comparative religion in college and then went to graduate school for a year. I was in college at Columbia, New York City, and went to the University of Chicago for a year, the divinity school, Christian divinity school, thinking I wanted to study. I spent, following the hostage crisis in Iran, 1979, years studying Islam. A relative of mine was one of the hostages. I was completely swept up with that crisis. And I began to study Islam, and I read shelves of books on anthropology, history, sociology, theology, Arab history, yada, yada, yada. Every book by a PhD or something. Then I became religious. Then I began to read the Torah in the original and realized that in the handful of verses dealing with Ishmael, there's deeper understanding than all the guys with the PhDs. If you can get into Ishmael in the Torah and understand his personality and read the great interpreters from Rashi on and the Rambam and the Ramban, you get a sense of their character as you do not get from the guys with the PhDs. The Torah is teaching you truth about life and about people, which was true thousands of years ago and still is. And when I see these 17-year-olds throwing rocks at us and using their slingshots, which is David's weapon, and when you see the mullahs in their videos giving their sermons, you can catch them on archive stuff in memory.org and PMW, the Palestine Media Watch. You see these mullahs giving their sermons, and you are in a time travel back into about the 8th century. Their minds are still working as they worked in the 8th and 7th centuries.
I kind of think they prefer the slings and the rocks and the knives more than the modern weapons because they have that. I remember just before Israel went into Gaza, I was living in Bahrain at the time, and you could see the valley where all the Arab villages were. Yeah. And the night before the day, I was actually even in the afternoon, it was still daylight. Before Israel was going to go into Gaza the next morning. And it was, no one wanted to go. It was horrifying. Even though we knew that there was not an existential threat to Israel, there was no way they could win a war against us, but no one wants to go to war. And there they are. The Arab villages are putting up fireworks. They're looking forward. They were relishing the idea of going out to war, even a war they would lose. Just the idea that they could go out to war made them happy. And I was just like, I can't go there. I can't understand it. It's just a different animal.
Look, if you look at the Arab world today, it's the same world that's been around for a long time. They are killing each other in Libya. The tribes are fighting. They're killing each other in Yemen. They're killing each other in Iraq. They're killing each other in Syria. 1975 to 1989, I think it was, 150,000 people in Lebanon were killed. The Algerians had a civil war in the 1990s, 200,000 people killed. These are not soldiers in uniform on a battlefield. These are civilians who are just murdered in their streets. It's
barrel bombs.
All kinds of, well, the barrel bombs, that was Assad dropping on his own people. They're constantly fighting with each other. And that was one of the foolish things about the so-called peace process of Peres and Rabin and Balin, is these people can't make peace with each other. And they think they're going to make peace with us. Sorry, it's not going to work out that way. All we can do is defend ourselves until they mature. When that's going to happen is anybody's guess.
By the way, you got a big compliment. People are loving this. And I can understand why. If I may, we've been talking for a long time, and I really appreciate it. The time goes so fast. I can't let you go without asking one question. And to be very candid, I'm kind of afraid of the answer. I'm a big fan of the Abraham Accords. I love it. I love the fact that we can look over our borders and not see just an ocean of enemies. There are friends out there, allies, close by. That's what I'd like to believe. But I also understand that things that are not based in truth do not last. And you mentioned about the Abraham Accords, that the Abrahamic Accords, that it might not be so accurate to call them that.
Right.
Do you see a future in that, or are we going to have to?
It's a good thing. It's a good thing that we have established commercial relations with the UAE and Bahrain, and others are coming on. Oman. There's no doubt about that. The average Muslim that I know here in Judea and Samaria is a quiet guy who just wants to work and support his family. The problem is that they are led by people for whom Islam is the be-all and the end-all. Also, Islam hates nationalism. That's the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood was invented to combat nationalism. The Muslim Brotherhood.
Really?
Yes. The Muslim Brotherhood came into being in 1928 in Port Said, Egypt, a school teacher. They were horrified in 1928 about what Ataturk had done to Turkey. The Turks had a caliphate for 400 years. And then after World War I, when they blew it, the caliphate collapsed, Ataturk comes in, they fight, he takes over, and he's wildly pro-Western. What he did in Turkey was phenomenal. The changes he wrought are hard to believe. Not only did he remove the hijab and the scarves for the women, he took the alphabet out of the hands of Arabic. Until Ataturk in the 20th century, Turkish, which is a separate language, was written with Arabic letters. Today it's written with Latin letters. That was Ataturk. He was also very big on Turkish nationalism as opposed to Islam. He wanted to de-Islamize Turkey.
Some people actually claim that he has Jewish roots.
Yes, he's Dunmei. That's one of the accusations against him, which seems to have some kind of basis. The Dunmei were the Sabbateans, the Shabtai Tzvi heretics, who he seems to have been educated with that community in Saloniki in Greece. In any case, the old-timers were horrified by what he was doing. He was westernizing and de-Islamizing the area, when for the Muslims, nationalism is anathema because it's a rival for your religious feelings. They hate nationalism. They have a hard time with it. The Egyptians are one of the few Arab countries who have a national identity, and it's really because of the pyramids having nothing to do with Arabs.
I mean, if you think about it, the UAE is the United Arab Emirates. They are a collection of
Correct.
Tribes. It's not
Exactly.
one country.
Exactly. It's their emir is a prince, and they're still tribal. And the great Mordechai Kedar, he has a plan, and he's absolutely right. We have to rule Judea and Samaria. First of all, we must say that Judea and Samaria, the land, the immovable land, is ours as of right, legally and morally. This is our land. Then the question is, what do we do with the non-Jews here? And we can live with that too. And his idea is to have them like the UAE, which is a conglomerate of different emirs. And that's what we have to have, because all of the Arabs in Judea and Samaria know their tribe. Even if they're not living in a tent, they're living in an apartment someplace. And they drive a car, and they're modern in that regard. They all know their tribes, and it's important to them in terms of who they marry. And what you do is you need to deal with them as they deal with themselves at a tribal level. In 1993, the PLO was offered a state, and they never could get together. The guys in Ramallah and the guys in Hamas, in Gaza, there's two different communities. The people in Gaza are always anchored towards Egypt. They speak like an Egyptian Arabic. The people in Ramallah were heavily Christian and have no sense of brotherly love with the Arabs in Gaza. And to this very day, these people have never been able to unite. They are the split between Fatah and Hamas mimics the split between the Sunnah and the Shia. Both of those terms are stolen from Hebrew. The Shia is the Hebrew word si'ah, meaning faction, and Sunnah is Tanya. It is this fruit shin nun hey from Lishnot, Rosh Hashanah, something that changes, and it means the tradition because it's something that repeats again and again and again. Sunnah is connected to a Hebrew word. Shia is connected to a Hebrew word. The great Ibn Ezra, writing in medieval Spain, who knew Arabic, says Arabic is bad Hebrew spoken by desert illiterates. And it's that.
Boom!
But that's the case. The Muslims did not have a book until the Quran in the 7th century, when we got our 5 books in the year 1313 BCE. And then we had the Talmud. We had the biblical canon, which closes about the year 300 before the rise of Christianity. And these people are still illiterate. And their whole language is like a bad version of Hebrew. It's like with a speech defect. We say shalom and they say salam. And there's one, and the Sunnah is our Shana. It's like our evil twin, as they do on television when they run out of storylines for their television shows. The star has to confront his evil twin. This is our evil twin. This is who the Muslims are. And because the Muslims are the dominant culture, it's going to be problematic. In other words, the Messianic era is not around the corner yet, even though it's good that these countries are now having peaceful, civilized relations with us. No one can go against that. But I am just very cautious about thinking, tomorrow we're going to have all peace with the Arabs. It's not going to be so simple. Everything for them is Islam. Everything for them is Islam. And Islam is a form of anti-Semitism. It's all been stolen. There's not one original idea in Islam that has not been plagiarized from the Jews. And for them in that text to get around the hostility and the history of the Jews in Islam, it's not a pretty history. The Jews suffered from Christians in Europe, and they suffered from Muslims in Africa and in Asia, in not in identical ways, but they did suffer. There's no doubt about it. In every century, you can find riots, pogroms, persecutions of the Jews in the Muslim world. It's a war against the Jews in many ways.
And almost all the Jews came back from the Arab countries when Israel became a nation, which cannot be said for the Ashkenazi Jews.
That's exactly right.
Where
those people fled like
the majority of them are still there.
Within a year and a half, 650,000 Jews, 800,000 rather, about left the Arab countries. Because after Israel survived and embarrassed the Arabs in the 1948 fight, then life became intolerable in all of these Muslim countries, and the people had to get out, and they got out real fast. The ones with money and connections went to France, where they continue speaking French, and from Morocco and Algeria and Tunis. Some went to Canada, they continue speaking French. But the average guy and the lower guys and the poorest people of all came here because they had no place else to go, and they had to get out because there were riots, there were pogroms, and it's all in my book.
Shai, I could listen to you day and night. For my readers, my listeners, as I said, Shai has a podcast once a week, and he has for subscribers. He has 3 times a week. He has at www.phantom-nation.com. He has his radio show, his subscription radio show. I could really, one day if I ever get to be smart, I want to sound like you. I really can't thank you enough. I've had several requests on the comments to have you back because people really appreciate the truth that you have to put down, and I think it's because you make sense of the craziness that's being reported through the biblical lens. You're just so firmly so firmly based in the Bible that the current events make sense to you. And I really appreciate that. So I'd like to thank everyone for watching us. If you want to see more of this, you should subscribe to our newsletter at Israel365news.com. And in any case, thank you for being with us. If you bless us, we have to bless you back. That's the rules. That's what's written. That's the way it works. So thanks for joining us. Be blessed and have an amazing day.
Thank you, Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz.
Thank you, Shai.